The Amazing Spider-Man 2 is directed yet again by Marc Webb and stars Andrew Garfield, Emma Stone, Dane DeHaan and Jamie Foxx. Now, unlike the first Amazing Spider-Man movie, which I thought was okay at first but I grew to dislike over time, this movie I just straight up really didn't like from the moment I first saw it, and unfortunately my opinion hasn't changed since then. I really don't like this movie. Now, before I tear this movie a new one, I do want to point out a few things that I actually don't mind about the movie. I think they're done pretty well. And the first of those is the actual look of the movie. I think it looks very nice. I think it's very vibrant, colourful and very stylish, even if there is a bit too much CGI going on at times. But that being said, it really does make the movie have a certain tone and style about it which is unique to this movie. And that being said, that does lead into another thing that I liked, which is one specific fight in the movie, which is the Times Square fight. I think that scene is handled very well. I think it's very well executed as an action scene, and again, I think it looks very colourful and very vibrant. The other thing that I thought was pretty good in this movie are the performances by Andrew Garfield as Peter Parker / Spider-Man and Dane DeHaan as Harry Osborn. Not the Green Goblin, just Harry Osborn, but I'll get onto that in a minute. Yeah, I think Andrew Garfield's performance is a lot better than it was in the last movie. He really does vary in terms of the emotions that he gives. And I think Dane DeHaan as Harry Osborn, for the most part, is pretty likeable, and I think that his relationship with Peter Parker is kind of well realised. Not perfectly, but for what they were going for, I think it's done as best as it could. Okay, now that that's out of the way, let's talk about the shit things in this movie, and trust me, we have a lot to talk about. And the first one I want to mention is something that a lot of people have picked up since the movie was released, and that is Spider-Man. Yeah, Spider-Man is a problem within his own movie. That's not a good start. Now, one thing that people didn't like about the original Spider-Man trilogy is that the crime-fighting aspect of Spider-Man was there, but he didn't quip and do jokes as much as he did in the comics. And they did try and do that with the first Amazing Spider-Man movie, and I think they did it pretty well, because they managed to balance the amount of quips that he gave with the crime-fighting to make it kind of 50-50, which works pretty well. That being said, there weren't that many quips in the movie, which still made people complain. In this movie, they go overboard with the amount of jokes and quips that he does in the movie, to the point where it actually distracts from the job he's supposed to be doing. The best example I can give for that is the very opening scene where Rhino, or the guy who is supposed to be Rhino, is just ploughing a truck through traffic, and it's flipping cars and bikes and stuff and all like that, and all Spider-Man is doing is hanging on the side of the truck, talking to him and making jokes. Whereas millions or thousands of people are dying from the wreckage and carnage that the truck is, doing. But no, he's just there quipping jokes. The only one person I think he saves is, I think, a little kid and Max Dillon. Apart from that, though, a lot of people die, and it is very clear that they die, because there's even one shot, if you zoom in very closely, that shows a dumpster being pushed way to the side and crushing some people. And that's not to mention all the people that are in the cars that are being flipped and just landing on their top. I mean, he's just letting innocent people die for the sake of good comedy. Okay, the next problem I have is unfortunately something that Spider-Man 3 had, so you would have thought they would have learnt from their mistakes. But no, they didn't. In fact, this movie has probably a worse case of too many villains than Spider-Man 3 does. In Spider-Man 3, you had Sandman's story, Venom's story, and the new Green Goblin story. In this movie, you have Electro's story, which is kind of the main focus in terms of bad guys, so he kind of is the main bad guy of the movie. You have the Green Goblin, which feels very tacked on. And then you have Rhino, who feels like he shouldn't be there anyway, because he's there for two kind of scenes. And the reason I say kind of is because he's there at the start, he's there at the end, and then you never see him for the rest of the movie. And there's honestly no point of him being there. It really just feels incredibly tacked on. And that being said, the way these villains are executed aren't specifically the best. Jamie Foxx's performance as Electro is quite menacing, but when he's Max Dillon, I just felt as if his performance was rather over the top. I think it was a very clever idea to make one of the most charismatic actors working today a very geeky nerd with a bad hairstyle. But I just feel like his performance was way too over the top for it to be pulled off well. Then you have Dane DeHaan, who, like I said, was pretty good as Harry Osborn, but as soon as he turns into what looks like a troll doll with herpes, also known as the Green Goblin, it just doesn't work. And then, like you said, you got Rhino, played by Paul Giamatti, who is in 2 scenes and really doesn't do much. And only the one time where he is actually Rhino, it's just left... It's just so underwhelming, and I'll get onto that in a minute more specifically. And all these villains thing kind of leads into a specific problem I have with one moment in the movie, which is kind of a spoiler, and some of the points that I will address from now on may contain spoilers, so if you haven't seen the movie, you have been warned. But this one's very mild for the most part. There is a moment in the movie where Harry Osborn gets fired from his own company, Oscorp. Yeah, he's the owner of the company, but he's fired from it. I'm not quite sure that's how it works. If he owns the company, he can fire whoever he wants. I'm pretty sure someone with a lower, rank than him can't fire the guy at the top. That's not how business works. Another problem I have with this movie is the subplot with Peter's parents. Now, when I first saw this movie, I actually thought it was pretty interesting, but unfortunately, the more I watch this movie, the more that segment of the movie just feels very tacked on and utterly pointless. It really doesn't work, and the whole thing about the underground train, carriage that's like secret and you need like special things to open it, that just felt like utter bullshit. It just really did not work. It doesn't work for the sake of the movie, and it really doesn't work for the sake of that plot, because it's just stupid. Now, the next thing I want to address is the love relationship between Gwen and Peter. And even though I do think their chemistry does improve in this movie, I think it's handled really badly. Because in the original Spider-Man trilogy, we have this on and off relationship between Mary Jane and Peter. In the Amazing Spider-Man, we have this on and off relationship with Gwen Stacy and Peter Parker. And in this movie, you've got an on-off relationship with Gwen. You get the point. And it really doesn't help the fact that the reasonings behind them doing this are kind of stupid. You've got Peter, who is trying to not break a promise he made to Captain Stacy when he died at the end of the last movie, to never see Gwen again. And that's understandable. But the way he goes about it is probably the most dick way possible, that it just really, really doesn't work. And then you've got Gwen, who really wants to see Peter again. And again, it would work, but the way it's handled, it just doesn't. It's really, really badly handled. And this leads on to my next point, which I am warning you now is a massive spoiler for the end of the movie, and that is the death of Gwen Stacy. And there are 2 very specific reasons why I think this doesn't work. First of all, it's pointless. She does not need to die in this movie at all. There is no reason for her to die. She just dies. And the second reason is that it's handled in such a cack-handed and rushed way that I feel no emotion when she is dead. It just happens so suddenly, like that I just don't feel anything for the moment that is happening. Even though Andrew Garfield's performance is very heart-wrenching at this point, again, the scene just doesn't have anything going for it, which is why I don't think it's a very effective death scene. And I'll tell you what doesn't help. With her dying and them having a funeral at the end of this movie makes Amazing Spider-Man 2 the 4th Spider-Man movie to end with a funeral. They really got to stop doing this. I do hope Spider-Man Homecoming does change it up a bit, because I'm getting really tired of seeing funerals in Spider-Man movies. It's like seeing unnecessary racism in a Transformers movie. You don't need to see one, but it's there anyway. And finally, the last thing I want to point out in this movie, which is something I really am annoyed about, is the final shot of the movie. If you're not aware of what I'm talking about, then let me just explain. The final shot of the movie is the final shot of the trailer, whereby it looks like it's setting up this really cool action set piece between Rhino and Spider-Man. And there's explosions everywhere, they're both charging at each other, and then it cuts. That's what happens in the trailer, and that's also what happens in the movie, and it just feels like this huge, ball of disappointment. Personally, I think they would have been better with putting that specific Rhino fight at the beginning of the movie, so we could actually fucking see it. But just having it at the end feels, again, like a lot of things in this movie, very tacked on, and just the way it cuts and goes to credits, it's just so annoying. As you can tell, I really dislike this movie quite a bit, and I'm going to give it the same grade that I gave The Amazing Spider-Man, which is a 4 out of 10. I will say one thing though. If I was to be tied down to a chair and forced to watch either The Amazing Spider-Man or The Amazing Spider-Man 2, I would still watch it. Even though I think they're incredibly pointless and shit, I would still watch it. Because there is something about them that has a sense of rewatchability to them, despite them being as crap as they are. Yet again, if I was to be tied to a chair and forced to watch Food Fight, for example, then I would have to kill you. So guys, that's my review of The Amazing Spider-Man 2. I hope you enjoyed it, and that also means we are almost coming to the end of my Spider-Man series of reviews. My very last one will be Spider-Man Homecoming next month. I'm very much looking forward to that. In the meantime, guys, like the video if you enjoyed it, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Bye!